Hey, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Apologize for the brief delay there, but we're on board. We have connection, and we're ready to get started. This presentation is going to be recorded and made available afterwards, so feel free to check out the recording on YouTube as well as all the other videos that we have posted. If you have questions and if you have comments, use the chat feature on YouTube or comment on LinkedIn, and we'll be sure to address those at the end. From here, I'll pass it over to Ralph.
Okay, guys, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us. Sorry for being late a little bit. We went through a couple of technical issues. Those issues still remain because I cannot hear you, should you want to say anything. So I will most likely not be able to answer any questions that you might have. Anyhow, that should not keep us back. We won't be held back here. Today we are talking about automatic asset discovery. Before I go into details about the various technologies that are used in this field, let me make one thing very clear. If you still try to manually discover your assets, build an OT asset inventory, you're just wasting time. And there is a simple reason for that. If you want to use your asset inventory for any use case, such as vulnerability management, obsolescence management, whatsoever, you need a certain level of detail. So that would include, for example, all the software, all the patches that are installed on your Windows box. It's not just an idea of what the operating system might be. You want all the details. You want installation dates from your OT devices. You want serial numbers. So you need those serial numbers in order to process vendor product notices, as an example, or vendor safety notifications. You need very detailed information. Otherwise, your asset inventory is useless. And therefore, why bother to even try to fill in that Excel spreadsheet? So, having that said, there are basically three major techniques for OT asset discovery that are in use, and the three are active scanning, passive scanning, and active probing. And those are, and we will go through the details how they differ. Okay, so first of all, active scanning, that's probably one of the oldest in this realm. And the background for active scanning is penetration testing. This is how this technology was invented, because obviously it is possible to send traffic to your endpoints in the network and see, and based on the response that you get, try to identify potential ways for penetration. Okay, so this is in this way you could say, well, those are basically hacker tools, and this is how that all started. On the other hand, you can also use the information, and it was always used that way, to get an idea of what the endpoint identity and configuration might be. So, for example, you could get an idea how what type of what version of operating system was installed on a given Windows PC. Okay, you could get an idea that if you are able to talk to TCP port 502 on a device, that device would probably run Modbus. It would probably be an RTU. Okay, and so this is how active scanning works and used to work for so many decades. The one issue, if any issue, that we have with this technology is that an active scanner usually talks for a given endpoint to thousands of TCP ports and UDP ports and sends a shit ton of traffic to those ports in the attempt to figure out what that endpoint might be and what specific vulnerabilities it might have. And when I speak about vulnerabilities in this context, it has actually a little to do with what we refer to as OT vulnerability management in our space, because here it's more about configuration problems, configuration weaknesses, right? Such as default passwords, or such as, well, you should not use SMB version 1. You should never do that these days. So that port should simply not be available. That service should be blocked. This is what a vulnerability scan yields. Okay, and this is how it's used. Still, it's used in IT for that very purpose. Popular products in this realm would be Nmap, would be Nessus, very popular for vulnerability scanning. Or even if you think about more commercial platforms, Qualys would come to mind. Qualys is basically the same story. Qualys sends network traffic to a given endpoint to a couple of thousand ports in order to figure out what those individual vulnerabilities or configuration weaknesses of that device might be. And this is basically the area where you have seen and heard that this technology might/will yield to problems in the OT space. That it might be disruptive, that it could break OT devices, and that is totally valid, because those OT devices are not designed to actually deal with all kinds of random traffic on thousands of TCP and UDP ports. So whenever you hear the concern, well, that might be unsafe, that might be dangerous to use active scanning to build out an OT asset inventory, that is the focus of this discussion. That is the use of something like Nessus or any other vulnerability scanner. There are very few scenarios still today where people use something like Nmap for real in order to build an OT asset inventory. That's a different story. Because you still, I mean, even if you have collected the raw information about make and model, etc., you still need a platform, and a database platform, where you can process all that data and make it available to the user in any meaningful way, also including workflows, etc. Okay, but so this is what, but when people talk about active scanning, this is what they usually refer to. Then we have passive scanning. And that is also in the realm of penetration testing and hacking. So the first passive scanning products were designed to handle or to address the use case of intrusion detection. Most often, right? So, but here's the catch. So no matter if you look at intrusion detection or if you look at penetration testing, it's only a matter of who uses these tools or how they are applied, what they are used for, if you want to call them hacking tools or if you want to call them like security tools, right? Because hackers basically use the same tools, the very same tools, when they try to intrude into your networks for malicious purposes. And this is also true for passive scanning, and I'm referring to the origin of the technology. Okay, I don't refer to any OT products that you would know of, like with the ICS detection process. So that's a different story. But I'm talking about the origins. So, for example, you would use a passive scanning approach to harvest credentials. If those credentials are transmitted in clear text, well, then certainly the sniffer, as it's also called technically, these products also used to be referred to as sniffers, network sniffers, they will then certainly show you the credentials in clear text. But other than that, you could learn a lot about potential intrusion pathways. You could learn a lot about the attack surface by just analyzing the legitimate network traffic that you observe, okay? And then as far as the intrusion detection is concerned, certainly you would also try to identify anormal and potentially malicious traffic that you see in all the traffic that you have collected. And this certainly brings us then to the ICS detection product category, where this technology is used exactly in that same way. Now, I think that's a very still a very good use of the technology, and still, if you want to identify potentially malicious traffic, this is the way to go, obviously, right? The problem comes in when you also try to use this data that you're collecting in an effort to build an OT asset inventory. And why is that a problem? Well, for a very simple reason. The traffic that you pick up in this legitimate back and forth between the SCADA system and the PLCs and the RTUs, etc., does not yield enough data, not enough data for your use cases that you have in mind, for your vulnerability management, etc., etc. It does only, usually it yields most of like the process data that is manipulated or that is collected for the SCADA system, but very little about the identity and configuration of your OT devices, and this is the problem. So you can try to remedy this this situation by interpreting or inferring what that endpoint might be. Because whether you think, well, that conversation here, that traffic looks like it's using a specific version of a protocol, etc. So therefore, I might infer that this is something like product X in version ABC. And this uncertainty that you have to infer identity and configuration of endpoints because you don't have complete information available. This then leads to the probabilities that you see exposed in some ICS detection products when they show you the vulnerabilities that might affect that particular device. In the CVE mapping per se, there are no probabilities that such a thing doesn't exist. So a CVE always matches a given configuration with 100% certainty. This is how the whole CVE and CPE system works. But if you don't have that full information, and you only have to you can only infer device identity and configuration from the data that you have, then certainly your identification is associated with a particular probability, and that also then affects your vulnerability management. Okay. So that only works so well if you want to try to extend the use cases to building an OT asset inventory. With the third technology that we look at, which is active probing, things are different. So active probing has a totally different heritage. The two other technologies that we have discussed, active scanning, passive scanning, they come from the security/hacking domain. The active probing approach comes from a totally different domain, which is engineering. Because what we call active probing is basically rooted in engineering systems, in engineering software and proprietary inventory tools that you see from the various automation vendors. So think of it this way. Look at a given automation vendor. That might be Rockwell, it might be Siemens, it might be Beckhoff, you name it, right? Yokogawa, Honeywell, you name it. All of them provide software that does a very decent job of identifying your various OT endpoints, along with the configuration, of the backplane of a PLC rack, etc. How is that possible? What are they doing different? Why isn't there any probability or something like that? Why don't they crash devices? Well, because the technical approach is totally different. These products, and to these you can also subsume our OTbase because it uses the identical approach. These products take advantage of the legitimate industrial protocols that have been designed for the communication between engineering software and the OT devices. So those protocols might be standardized, such as in the case of Profinet or Ethernet IP or Modbus, or they might be proprietary, such as in the case of Siemens or Yokogawa VNet, or you name it, right? However, anytime that you start up your RS links, as an example, and run RS-who, guess what is happening? Your RS-who is browsing your whole OT network and all the networks beyond that networks, like all the SIP networks behind that. And well, is that dangerous? Is that unsafe? Well, I guess not. If you ask me or any other seasoned engineer, it seems to work pretty well. And you get all the details that you need. So let me give you an example, even very specific details, such as manufacturer date. You can solicit this type of information if you are using the specific commands that the vendors have built into those protocols and into those standards, okay? And that is something that is totally out of scope for active scanning and passive scanning. So that's the difference. And now you may remember this saga, this legend. Well, it's so unsafe. All of those systems might crash, and the whole plant might just explode. Well, did you ever have the same concerns when actually executing an RS-who? I think you won't. When you do a vulnerability scan, you might actually have had those concerns. And just the other day, I found a very funny article on LinkedIn. Maybe we can bring this up, Braxton. And this is about vulnerability scanning in the IT space. How do you deal with the stress and pressure of vulnerability scanning work? So this is such a pressure, because you never know. You never know what's going to happen, right? And again, this is completely different from what you would see in any engineering tool, such as TIA Portal from Siemens, or the various other tools, and also the proprietary inventory tools and OTbase. Do devices crash when they are probed with RS links? Yes, they do. That's a fact. That is absolutely a fact. We have seen it. And I just want to give you a means of gauging the risk that is usually totally overblown. So there is a residual risk when you just do this active probing, when you send legitimate commands to a device that supposedly talks something like Ethernet IP. I mean, you have purchased it with the claim that this device would support Ethernet IP or SIP or Profinet, you name it, right? That device might crash. We have seen it when confronted with traffic from RS links. That device would then also crash when it receives packets from OTbase, when we do our probing, okay? That is a fact. Now the question is that something that should cost your sleep? And you can imagine what my answer would be. But I just want to give you an idea. So let's look at a very similar area of life. When you think about potential adverse side effects of medication. You know, I had a very interesting experience just 2 weeks ago when I had to get a tetanus booster shot. Bang. And I have to explain this for just a little bit, because it's going to be funny for the European listeners, because they don't know how that works in the US. So in the US, you can get that vaccination, that booster shot, at a drugstore at CVS or Walgreens or whatever. So I went to CVS just nearby. Oh, I need that tetanus booster. Yeah, sure. So you pay your 70 bucks, I think it is roundabout, and then you get handed a I would say, what, 2 or 3 pages of paper where they inform you about those potential side effects, etc. So, and and I happen to be one of the people who actually reads that stuff. And one of the things that they mentioned, well, in very rare situations, it could lead to death, that vaccination. Oh, I thought, oh, that's not good. Yeah, but then on the other hand, so that is a real risk. The question is, how big is it? And for your own risk calculation, for your risk management, would you reject the tetanus shot or any other vaccination? I mean, you take you pick your favorite medication, and again, once that you read the additional information that they give you, and you learn about the side effects. Oh, that doesn't look so good. However, everybody knows, in by experience from real life, that possibility is so astronomically low that I'm willing to take the risk. And I am living proof that it can be survived, right? So, I mean, all humor aside, this is approximately the risk that we're talking about. So when somebody wants to scare you, well, you should think you should think twice about using that active approach. Why don't you just stick to our um, appliance-based approach, passive scanning, etc., because nothing can happen there. Actually, that's not quite true, but just for the sake of the argument, we would assume nothing can happen there. And just consider all the things that all your devices, you could experience downtime, serious downtime for hours, only because of that active probing. Well, that is not quite the case. So in reality, it looks very much different. And again, if you let me say it this way: if you are scared about doing your RS Who with RS links, well, then okay, then I understand your position. Then you should not consider using something like active probing as we have implemented it in OTbase. So for those who are still with me, it's okay, we got it. There is probably enough merit in this approach. Maybe we just check it out. So for those of you, I want to give you an idea how it actually works. And in order to do that, let's just look at OT-based discovery. And let me show you how it is configured and what it actually does. Okay, so we should share my screen again. By the way, so what you see here is the configuration front end for OT-base discovery. And the real discovery work that happens behind the scene, that's implemented in a Windows server that you certainly don't see. But in order to configure the UI, you use this application. And here is the kicker. This is a piece of software that you can download for free from our website. So if you go to langner.com or otbase.com, there is a download button and you can check it out. And how cool is that? Because this way you will also be able to judge for yourself how unsafe or dangerous it is, because you could, for example, experiment with the software in your test environment, or you could just give it a try during scheduled outage. Okay, now let's look at the configuration. By the way, you see in the meantime, this table is filling up again. due to the probing that happens behind the scenes. And I would also like to urge you to check how long it actually takes. So this thing will be over in a couple of minutes. But let's look at the right pane here. So in the right pane, you can configure a couple of protocols that are used to actually solicit the information from all those OT endpoints. And these are a couple of proprietary protocols such Emerson Rock, then we have MELSEC, then we have TwinCat ADS, and then we have the standards such as Ethernet IP and Modbus. On top of that, we also support SNMP, WinRM, WMI for the more IT style components. And then we have ARP and ICMP in order to obtain a list of all the IP addresses on that given network that are active. Okay, so this is how you can configure the probing. You don't need to configure a lot here in the left side of this window because all the available networks are pre-populated. So when OTbase discovery is started, it automatically determines, okay, these are all the local networks that I can reach. And on top of that, you can add other remote networks that you can route into. Good. So this is basically how that works. We are using legitimate industrial protocols in order to get the information that we're interested in. And in our case, this happens very quickly, as you can see, only in 2 or 3 minutes. This list is almost complete. So it's just 2 other endpoints are left. And the information is so much more detailed. Like just as an example, for every Windows box, you get the serial number, you get the operating system version, you get the license key, you get all the installed software, all the installed patches with their install dates. You get the system health. What does that mean? We collect information about the hard disk health. We collect information about the memory usage, about the CPU usage, about the hard disk utilization, so that you can then track all those health parameters and discover potential resource exhaustion before it happens. And then there are so many more data that you get for all those PLC racks. You get an idea what is in that rack. You can also see any field buses behind that rack. So in this case, you're looking at a Profile bus network for this Rockwell rack. You can see a couple of control nets behind that particular device. And as you can see, so this is just a plethora of information that you can really put to good use in an OT asset management system. And you cannot gather this wealth of information if you limit yourself to passive scanning. With active scanning, that's a totally different story. Not only would you not be able to gather all that data, but you would then run the high risk of actually crashing your production, which is something that nobody wants. Okay, so with that having said, now let's try to sum up the benefits here. So first of all, you get much better data that you need for certain use cases, such as vulnerability management, such as obsolescence management. There are no probabilities associated with that data, because if the PLC tells you, well, I am a rack, right? And in my rack there are 3 ENBT cards of running firmware version so and so, then you can know with certainty if that rack and the various ENBT cards are plagued with that recent known vulnerability that Rockwell has disclosed, which is pretty nasty because it already has a known exploit, and it has and it allows for persistence and all the nasty stuff that should raise some hairs for the OT security team. All that information will be extracted with certainty. There is no guesswork in there. Could I be affected by that vulnerability? Well, you don't need to guess. OTbase will tell you right away. And by the way, one other thing, we might do a vulnerability management webinar again one of these weeks. In OTbase, there is no such thing as a vulnerability scan as an active process that you launch with a click of the mouse. That doesn't happen. OTbase automatically, constantly reassigns, reassesses your attack surface with all the known vulnerabilities. So you never have to initiate that action. It constantly happens in the background so that you're always up to date. So the other plus when you think about the data is that on top of the device make and model data, serial number, etc. You get so many additional information, like I mentioned about the device health. You get manufacturer dates, you get warranty information, all that detail that is so important for various use cases that are just what engineers do, and they no longer have to do that manually because the information is available just like that. It's in the database. And then let me remind you that you won't just see information about endpoints, but you will also see information about networks, as an example, right? So when we look at OTbase, there is a network inventory, and in that network inventory, which is built totally automatically. I mean, besides the color code. So the color codes are assigned by engineers. But other than that, you get this list automatically. And therefore, you get a very, very good and accurate understanding of your network architecture, which is, let's be honest, something that virtually no asset owner presently has. Why? It's very simple, because if you don't have a tool like this that collects all this information automatically, you will never be able to get a deep understanding of your architecture because it's so complex in OT, as opposed to IT. In IT, you might have a good understanding of your handful of networks that your operations rely on, but in OT, it's a totally different story, because again, you might have networks behind that PLC rack. You might have networks behind that other RTU rack that's behind the PLC rack, and that can go, let's just say, 5, 6, 7, 8 levels deep. And all this is collected automatically, including the field buses. Okay, and once that you want to leverage this data, let me just give you an example. So we single out just one of these networks. We want to learn more. We just do a double click. And by doing so, then, oh, excuse me, then we get an IP address list, right? Let me get rid of this right there, okay? And this IP address list is generated automatically. The only thing that's not automatic here is this picture that gives us an idea about the location of this particular network, where it is in that building. Okay, so that is obviously used by a human, added by a human user, but everything else is obtained automatically. So you get the full IP address list for this network. The green entries simply mean, well, these are spare IP addresses that you can assign to other devices. The color codes, other than that, represent device type. So gray would be network gear as an example, and pink is an actuator. You get an automatic topology diagram, just like that. There is no human labor involved in creating this. This just comes out of the box with the information that was discovered by OTbase discovery, right? So again, it's not just about the endpoints. And then if you look at any of these switches, then you also get additional details. So again, this was certainly added by a human user. But if you look at the port list here with all the connections, that is collected automatically. And I think, or I hope, this will give you an idea why this active probing approach is so superior if your objective is to do asset management. Again, so this is basically something that you have to keep in mind here. What do you want to accomplish? If you want to detect anomalies in network traffic that could point to an intrusion, this won't help you in any way. So that's a totally different use case. For that, you need ICS detection products. We don't do, and all of the, certainly RS Links, Yokogawa, etc., they all don't do network anomaly detection. If you want to detect potential attacks in network traffic in real time, OTbase is not the right product for you. However, if you want to build an automated OT asset inventory, well, then the ICS detection products will do a poor job, and we will do a better job. And you could even go so far, well, what about all those other inventory tools from the automation vendors? Well, some of them do a decent job. However, there are two issues associated with them. The first issue would be they lack. I would lean out of the window a little bit because I've seen a couple of these tools. They lack the usability, the depth, the various use cases that you see in OTbase, and in my opinion, for a very simple reason. The automation vendors don't sell these products in order to actually make money. So this is just a byproduct that helps them to manage the customer relationship. But this is not something that somebody would buy and say, wow, now all my OT asset management needs are solved. They cannot be solved for a simple reason, because those proprietary tools only address the various vendors' products, whereas OTbase is vendor neutral. Right, so you will see all your devices from the various vendors in one centralized database, and certainly that is what enterprise asset owners want. And then finally, the other benefit that you get with this active probing approach is simply the scalability, because you don't have to deploy hardware. So OTbase is a software-only product, and it does not require that you install any new hardware. So if you think about deployment, the OTbase discovery software product is installed on existing hardware, which in our case is always a Windows PC. That could be an engineering station, as an example. Okay, and from that Windows PC, it can discover all the endpoints that it can reach. In OT environments, in typical installations, this will never happen from a central position, like what you see here displayed as OTbase inventory. This is like the central database that you have seen earlier with the network inventory, etc. So this is something that you will find in IT environments, that the whole vulnerability scanning or the IT asset management product that you use to collect all the device data from your Windows boxes, that could be deployed centrally. In OT, you would never want to do that for security reasons, because your OT endpoints, they are insecure by design, and therefore you will make any effort to segregate your process networks. Now, therefore, what you will do is you will deploy OTbase discovery in those process networks decentrally, so that you might end up with dozens or even hundreds of OT-based discovery instances, which then all talk to one asset center. How is that even possible? Well, because they're running autonomously. So they will simply send out their asset information autonomously every 24 hours. Okay, so once configured, they do their probing, they collect all their asset information, which, as you have seen, usually only takes a couple of minutes, and then they automatically send that information to the central OTbase inventory instance. This is how that works. So for the deployments, well, you may have to deploy dozens or hundreds of these OTbase discovery thingies, but it's not hardware. That means you can install it like any other software product that you are already using in your factory environment, and that you might already also be installing automatically, like using SCCM as an example. So that those are basically the benefits for this active probing approach. And this is why we, when designing OTbase, we decided, well, this is the only thing that we are going to use because of the wealth of data that we collect, and because of the scalability, because our target customers, they're running tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of endpoints internationally, all all collected in one OT-based inventory. And technically, there is no other way that you can build an automatic OT asset inventory. So just to give you some rationale for why we are doing what we are doing. And with that, we are pretty much through with these topics. I won't be able to do a lot of in terms of Q&A, because again, I don't have audio, so I cannot hear anything that Braxton tells me. But Braxton, maybe you can signal if we have some questions that you can type out. And so if any of the attendees had a question that you want to expose, then we can try to make. Okay, how are new devices or protocols typically added in your product? Oh, that's a very practical, relevant question, I would say. So first of all, let's be very clear. Every approach, every product that uses this approach is limited, obviously, by the number of protocols, or by the nature of the protocols that it is using. Okay, and then there is a big difference on of how much mileage that gives you. The first thing I encourage you to do is check out the evaluation version and see what you can see already. And in almost every case, well, users are overwhelmed because something, well, that's only, let's just, I'm just making a number, that's only 15 protocols. I might only see 15 different vendors. No, that's nonsense. Because if you think of a given protocol such as Ethernet IP is a standard that's supported by hundreds of vendors, okay? Same thing would be true for Profinet or Modbus. So this gives us already a lot of mileage. Now, let's look at typical scenarios where customers say, well, guys, we love your product. It does a good job for most of our devices, but there are these gray or black areas where we only see an IP address, maybe also a vendor based on the MAC address. So how can we extend this? And there are some typical avenues that we take. In many cases, a device or a given product, if you will, could be discovered well using SNMP. The SNMP is very popular in that field. Unfortunately, the vendor in question did not bother to adhere to the standard. So in SNMP, it is standardized where that data about model, firmware version, serial number, etc., should be put into the packets, if you will, right? But the vendor didn't bother to actually do that. They used a non-standard MIP, so they buried the information somewhere else. For us, this is a regular scenario which we use to our advantage, because in that scenario, basically all we need is a SNMP dump from that customer, where they expose, okay, for that device, it's in that particular region of the MIP, and then we enhance our heuristics that we have in OTbase discovery, and then we map the fields correctly so that you will see that information exposed in the next version of OTbase discovery. And again, this is something that we do pretty much all the time. And one reason why for OTbase discovery, you see updates quite frequently. Then wait a second, I'm still not finished. I'm still not. Come on, we got to give the guy credit, because that was a very practically relevant question. And then there are other scenarios where, well, it's not about SNMP. So that particular product is using a proprietary protocol, and that would need to be implemented, right? So then, yes, then the question is there a business case for that? Does our customer, do they have 3 of these devices? Then we would probably tell, come on, just type them in by hand. Just add them manually to your database. But if they have 300, that's certainly a different story. And then we would investigate if that protocol can be added to OTbase discovery as a standard. And if you look at the list that you have seen in the product, you may remember like something like Beckhoff ADP. Or ADS, Beckhoff ADS. Well, Beckhoff is not necessarily the largest automation vendor in the world, right? But there has been a situation where an important customer told us, oh, guys, we have hundreds of these thingies, and we would rather like to see them in OTbase. And then if the protocol is documented, and best case, the vendor in question is willing to also cooperate, then we certainly go all the way and add that protocol to the set of standard protocols in the standard products. I want to share here, by the way, in the case of Beckhoff, Beckhoff did collaborate, so that is always a big plus. There are other vendors who I probably will expose in another context, not right now. But there are other vendors who simply basically signal, no, come on, just go away. We want to keep our customers in our proprietary space. Then it gets a little bit difficult. In that, if that happens, we usually try to take advantage of a proprietary inventory tool if it exists. So a good example would be Yokogawa. Yokogawa, with their VNet protocols, they said, no, we don't want to expose that for security reasons, blah, blah, blah. And you may know how that works if you're in this space for a long time. You will not make Yokogawa move, right? So they're just like a rock. So when they tell you, no, we won't collaborate, then it's a no. And then we will just take an intermediate step. We will export from their proprietary inventory tool, and from there push the data to OTbase inventory using a Python script, because that is very simple. OTbase inventory can also digest asset information, not only from OTbase discovery directly, but also from other sources that might include such a Python script, or from an Excel table that you already have available. Okay, next question, please. How is an initial active probe handled when you don't know what devices and what protocols are in use on the network? How does it decide what protocols to use to probe each device? Well, that's very simple. If there is an unknown endpoint on the network, we just go through through all the protocols sequentially. There is no specific heuristics involved here, and you may still think, oh, isn't that dangerous? Trust me, it's not dangerous. Otherwise, we would be out of business a long time ago. So that's a non-issue. Where we do already know a device, okay, so it's already in the list. If you remember when I showed you the probing, I initially deleted the list of endpoints for that network, right? If I hadn't done that, then in the next run, OTbase discovery would first try to use the protocols that it knows did already work, right? So that would limit the scope. But for a new IP endpoints for a new device, it would sequentially go through that list until it has either a hit or, well, it's just, we don't know. None of the supported protocols seem to yield any information. Again, please mark my words, you will be surprised about how many products and device types you will already see discovered properly by OT-based discovery. Let me add maybe one information here. I think that's worthwhile pointing out. We are targeting specific industries. So, for example, we are heavily focusing on manufacturing. We are not heavily focusing on electrical power, as an example, right? So, especially in transmission and distribution, with their specific protocols, I would give it to you. Well, that's OTbase is probably not a good product for discovery, for that automatic discovery, because so far we never bother to actually implement the specific protocols that are specific to that sector. Why is that the case? Not because we are just too dumb to make it happen, but because it is not our market. It's not the market that we are targeting. Once that this changes, well, we are happy to also implement those various IEC protocols that are typical in that sector. Okay, do we have another question? How do you handle IP address collision? How do you determine with the same IP address? Oh, I wouldn't call that IP address collision. I would call that duplicate IP addresses. I'm very grateful for that question because this is something that causes nightmares for anybody trying to use IT style products in the OT environment. In OT, we have to deal with duplicate IP addresses all the freaking time, right? Because network addresses are reused. So you have, especially those local network addresses, 192.168.00/24. Okay. You can have that in one and the same company, even in one and the same site. You can have that a dozen times or even a couple dozen times. That is a fact of life, and if you don't address this fact of life from the beginning, you are screwed. Now, how do we resolve that in OTbase? I probably shouldn't tell you in order not to give away our secret sauce, but it's actually pretty logical if you think about that. So you must be able to identify, no, this is a different 192.168.00 than the other one that I already have. And the way that we support this in OTbase is by adding the particular location of a network or of a device, like the geolocation, because you're talking about local area networks, and you will not have that local area network with that specific IP address at the same location with the same address. So that is something that doesn't happen, right? And if you wanted to, you can even say, okay, well, I can, just for the sake of the argument, I can install two networks at the same line or at the same plant component using the same address space. I mean, it would be pretty silly, but you could. And then you could separate those anyway in OTbase by assigning different location IDs. This is what we call it in OTbase, where you simply use a suffix like -1 and like -2, right? So that problem is solved. It's solved reliably. And if we would go back to our network inventory in OTbase inventory, you would see that, or you can have dozens of networks using one and the same IP address. That is not an issue because they're all separated by their different location IDs. And remember, once that you have that location mapping, you can then also bring in floor maps, bring in these campus maps where the user can even see right away, oh, that in that building, this is where you will find that network. So my point is that even yields a couple of extra benefits on top of that. But that's an absolute requirement. If you're not able to tell that this 192.168.0.5 is different from that other blah, blah, blah 0.5, then you're totally screwed in OT. And this is the way that we make that happen by assigning location IDs. And that's basically a topic in its own right. And I urge you to browse our YouTube channel because I remember there is at least one video that explains how it actually works in real life. Okay, other questions?
I think that's all for today. I know that we're coming up on the hour, but encourage everybody to go and download the version of OTbase, the evaluation software from our website. And until next time, we'll talk soon.